The port of New Orleans was the busiest port in the Gulf of Mexico, starting in the 18th century. By the mid-19th century, it was one of the busiest in the United States. Thousands of vessels called New Orleans home as their home port and were officially licensed and registered there. After the Civil War, as the Gulf's economy recovered from the devastation of that conflict, shipping and trade resumed and grew, and steamships began to dominate Gulf trade. However, sailing vessels, including wooden schooners, the most common of Gulf of Mexico vessels, continued to work the waters, carrying cargoes, fishing, and making a living sometimes in the most difficult trades with low profit margin, like carrying bulk cargoes such as lumber, coal, or fertilizer. The records of those vessels, numbering into the thousands, are in the U.S. National Archives, as are myriad documents that speak to voyages that once connected New Orleans to the rest of the world by water. The records also document the loss of a number of those vessels, as do records from other ports both in the U.S. and abroad for vessels that were registered, sailed from, and in some cases, never returned to their home port. These include vessels that were well known in their time, but also many vessels that, with their crews, worked hard in ocean trades, carrying cargoes, passengers, or fishing. Humble craft worked by crews of many races and nations, some of them families, who went to sea because they had a job to do to make a living. There was no such thing as a sick day for those who worked on ships in the 19th century. You simply had to go out. It was understood that you might not ever come back. Sometimes, surveys in the Gulf find shipwrecks that have nothing to specifically identify them. No name, no visible sign of the work they were doing, or whether there were survivors, reminders of hard work on an often unforgiving sea. The Viosca Knoll Shipwreck, discovered in 2003 in the deep water near the submerged knoll that gives the wreck its name, has been revisited by archaeologists and marine scientists who have studied it as an archaeological site and as a platform for deep-sea science to better understand the dynamics of marine life and the processes of microbiological colonization, decay, and the impacts of deep-sea oil spills on shipwrecks. Through several expeditions, much has been learned by scientists and archaeologists.
The Viosca Knoll wreck is in a little over 2,000 feet of water. One of the really interesting things about it is that the foremast, you can see exactly where it was laying, exactly how the rigging was laid out, and you get a pretty good snapshot of how this vessel was rigged from that.
The vessel dates to the last quarter of the 19th century, based on the identification of a water filter with its manufacturer's information found on the site during the archaeological investigation. It was manufactured between 1876 and 1884.
A late 19th century water filter that had been put on this ship as a way of helping to prevent cholera at sea. So that was kind of one of the unique things, and it was actually made in England.
The vessel likely wrecked either in the last quarter of the 19th century or the first part of the 20th century. The shipwreck's remains, primarily the lower portion of the wooden hull and associated artifacts, represent a two-masted sailing vessel, either a brig or schooners, the most common rigs for sailing vessels engaged in Gulf trade at the time. The vessel appears to have sunk with its masts in place. This may have been from progressive leaking or a sudden squall or weather event known as a knockdown, in which a vessel is blown over onto its beam end with the masts and sails in the water and then sinks as the rig and flooding pull the vessel down. The vessel came to rest on the seabed after sinking and settled on its starboard side. This could mean that no one survived this wreck. That's not always a given. Survivors have left us many accounts of dramatic sinkings from the period. Without a name for the wreck, at this time, we simply do not know more about what happened other than what the forensic evidence tells us. Vessels at the bottom of the Gulf speak not only to types of ships and trades, but also as reminders of the people and the vessels of over a century ago, who, like mariners today, worked in hazardous conditions on a sea that suddenly changes with a storm, and, as the well-known shipwreck song says, when the waves turn the minutes into hours.